He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. Considered punished by God, stricken by him. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him. We are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all.
Welcome to Engage Church as we gather tonight to remember all that Jesus did. We remember Jesus died, and we remember why he died. To blame historic events, Jewish leaders going and arresting him, the Roman officials putting him on trial, the people demanding crucifixion, the Romans fulfilling the orders. But the reason that Jesus came and died was because of you and me. We gather to remember Jesus' sacrifice. We remember that night that he was betrayed, the trial, the brutality of death. We gather as God's church, as a group mourning as if at a funeral of a loved one that took place, knowing that even this has a deeper meaning for our lives. We gather to lift up our apologies to God, who sent his Son to die for us, knowing that we are loved that much. We gather because Jesus opened the door for us to be God's church as he surrendered his life for us. We surrender our life to him. Let us pray. God of the universe, you knew exactly what you were doing from the very beginning. You knew that humanity would reject you. You knew that as a human race, we would never be able to follow you with all of our heart. You knew that you had to come and to fulfill all that was needed. Lord, it's with sad hearts that we come to worship you, to understand that your death was extremely meaningful, doing so much for us. May we take this time to reflect. May we take this time to open our hearts further to truly how much it cost you to go up onto that cross. We ask you, God, to be with us as we remember all that took place. So many. We lift this up in prayer, and all God's people said.
John 18, 1 through 12. When he had finished praying, Jesus left and crossed the Kidron Valley. On the other side there was a garden, and he and his disciples went into it. Now Judas, who betrayed him, knew the place, because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So Judas came to the garden, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees. They were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked them, Who is it you want?" "Jesus," they replied. "I am he," Jesus said, and Judas the traitor was standing there with them. When Jesus said, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. Again he asked them, "Who is it you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they said. Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. If you are looking for me, then let these men go." This happened so the words he had fulfilled, "I have not lost one of those you gave me." Then Simon Peter, who had the sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right hand. His name was Malchus. Jesus commanded Peter, "Put away your sword. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" Then the detachment of soldiers and the Jewish officials arrested Jesus. They bound him. Meanwhile, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. "I have spoken openly. I always taught in the synagogues or at the temple where all the Jews come together and said nothing in secret. Who heard me? Surely they know what I said." Jesus said by, slapped him in the face. "Is this the way you've answered the high priest?" he demanded. "If I said something wrong," Jesus replied, "testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me?" Will you surrender all to Jesus?
That's my question. Yeah. Isn't it interesting, this text playing out, that here the disciples were with Jesus, and even Peter said, I'll go to the grave with you. And yet Peter fled. And yet all the disciples fled. Jesus could have fled. We saw this man walking on water. We saw this man healing the blind. We saw this man doing so many things. He could have gotten out of that. He had gotten out of stuff like this before when they tried to stone him. He could have fought. He could have called a legion, argued his way out of this. He could have left the Pharisees and the Sadducees lost for words, not knowing what to do next. Jesus, knowing all, willingly went to Jerusalem, intentionally took a stand against the religious leaders who were running various things, claiming it to be done in God's name. Because he was his life to give you life. The invitation for you tonight and every single day is, will you surrender all to Jesus?
There's a place where mercy reigns, never. There's a place where streams of grace flow deep and wide, where all I've ever found comes like a flood, comes flowing down. At the cross where your love ran red and my sin washed white. I go all to you. I go all to you. Here, here on holy ground. Here I bow down. Here I bow down. Here arms open wide. Here you save my life. Here I bow down. Here I bow at the cross, at the cross. I surrender my life. I'm in awe of you. I'm in awe of you. Where your love ran red and my sin washed white. I go all to you. I go all to you. I go all to you. I go all to you, Jesus.
John 18:28. Then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, they did not enter the palace because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man? If he were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said, "Take him and judge him by your own law." "But we have no right to execute anyone," they objected. This took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked, "or did others talk to you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied. "Your own people and Jews handed you over to me. What is it that you have done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." "You are a king then," said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." Truth. Pilate. With this, he went out again to the Jews gathered there and said, "I find no basis for a charge against him. But it is your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at the time, Passover. Do you want me to release the king of the Jews?" They shouted back, "No, not him. Give us Barabbas." Now Barabbas had taken part in an uprising.
King of the Jews. If you think about how a king comes to power, whether they should or not, because they're born. David was selected by God as king. His son Solomon became king because he was born, and so on and so forth. You're royalty because you're born into it. Jesus dies in order to become a king. Think about that. He was a king from the very beginning. With God, everything was made through him. He is God. And yet, to become the king, he came down and he died. Entering into his kingship was very different for Jesus because his kingdom is very different. It's an everlasting one. It's bigger than a territory. If you're here in the U.S., in Spokane, you're in You're no longer in the U.S. You're in his kingdom. No matter where you are, if you go over and you land on the moon, you're in his kingdom. Visit any place, and you're still in his kingdom. You see, is set for eternity because of his death. Jesus became king by dying first for the Jews and then for the Gentiles. That's the beautiful thing, is when you see a king come into power, it's typically over their own territory, over their own people, and yet Jesus, when he became king, is for all of eternity, for everyone who would acknowledge him. But that's the point. It does take faith. What happens when you someone who thinks they're king, and you might even say they are a king, but once they are dead, what happens with their kingship? It's no longer theirs. Jesus, it's the opposite. See, Good Friday really is kind of a memorial service. It's to remind us what our king did. Think about a really good king. A bad king would sit on his throne dictating and say, you go off to war, you protect the kingdom, I'm going to sit here. A good king is going to protect their subjects. A good king is going to ensure supplies come in. A true king, a great king, will sacrifice themselves to protect. True kings will charge into battle to secure the victory. True kings do whatever it takes for their kingdom. The King of the Jews is our true king too. And he did just that, running straight into the battle to ensure victory, not for himself, but by going up into Jerusalem, by being arrested, by being put on trial and beaten and eventually crucified. That was the victory. That was crushing the head of Satan, stopping his voice in our life to say we don't give into that sin. Instead, we can turn to God. We're not going to be led astray. Us defeated the enemy. See, the king knew that it was that time, that place to win. He knew the moment was set in motion back when that first temptation came, and Adam and Eve, they chose to separate themselves from God. They chose to listen, and we've been doing it every day since. See, the King of the Jews said, you, his people, would be declared innocent because he was going to do whatever it would take for his kingdom. He took the punishment on himself. The King of the Jews did all of this before we even understood, before you even knew how to walk. Your king had already died for you. Before his disciples understood what it meant to us, he still was ready to do that, to go there, to breathe his last there. Before he knew what would happen, Jesus sacrificed his life. He knew what it meant. We saw him praying in the garden, blood from his forehead like sweat. He knew what he was doing. There was no question about it. He knew it meant dying the most painful death imaginable, suffocating while trying to pull himself up in order that his lungs would no longer be collapsed, but he'd be able to take that breath, only to feel his hands rip further on the nails holding him in place. The king gave up his life for his kingdom. To a cross. What was meant to bring an end to Jesus was used to bring true life to us. His kingship did not end. It was lifted high for all to see. King of the Jews. will you ask Jesus tonight to lead you to the cross? What does that mean for you? What does it mean by it all? Are we, his people, willing to say, better than anything else? As we go into this next song, the invitation is, you make it your prayer or not. To say, lead us to the cross, where we set aside our crown, where we set aside our agendas, where we set aside our sin, and we lay it all at his feet.